I'm here to introduce someone who's been thinking a lot about how we improve, Kevin Spall, Senior Vice President of Manufacturing, Procurement, and Sustainability at Scholastic. Kevin is working with his colleagues to build a publishing production platform for the future. He's here today to share his thoughts on a topic we can all relate to: thriving on chaos, just with less chaos. Please put your hands together and welcome Kevin Spall.
Good afternoon, everyone. That's cliche for me to say I'm the last speaker before the bar, but I'm really more concerned about the commute out of Manhattan on a Friday afternoon. So for those of you who are here and have to fight that, I thank you for that. It's humbling for me to be in this room. I started in New York publishing around 2001, 2002, and I came into this room as a young manager for R.R. Donnelley, and the speakers were on that end of the room. And so looking across this wide crowd in this incredible room was very intimidating to me at the time, and still intimidating. I remember thinking there were so many smart people in this room. Should I be here? And I still say that to myself. But I'm honored to be here. And I do want to acknowledge, I was on the BISG board at that time, about 20 years ago. And I've been in and out of board activities, and Brian has reached out and pulled me back in. And I have fond memories of those BISG board meetings and the activities we did in the early 2000s. We were doing a lot back then. And specifically Sally D. Decker, very intimidating. But she was just a bee of activity and energy in the industry, and specifically within BISG. And she just always wanted to get something new going within the industry to make it better. And I just was awe-inspired by Sally. And then Joe Ganella, who was just nose down doing hard work around shipping labels and ISBN. And I was on a few of those meetings and hosted a few that went well into the night. But hard work, but good work that was necessary for the industry. No disrespect, I'm not an English major. I'm an art major. And so I wonder why sometimes I come at some of these issues with more of an abstract approach. Thriving on Chaos, if you haven't read it, it's a very interesting book. I'm still reading it, actually. But the Thriving on Chaos, thank you, versus Thriving in Chaos just was something that I was grappling with. And really the intent is to lean into the chaos. Thriving in chaos means it's really kind of swirling you around, whereas thriving on it, you're leaning into it. You're expecting there's going to be ongoing chaos. So I moved on from my corner in BISG. Let me advance here. Which one do we push, Brian? There we go. Moved on, served various roles in the industry. So I was, as I mentioned, with R.R. Donnelley in a technology role. I moved into running a commercial book printing plant in Massachusetts. I went out and ran a pre-press and technology group for R.R. Donnelley in Ohio, came back out here to New York, and then I went to run a book printing company in Michigan that also had a publishing arm and a distribution arm. And I joined Scholastic proudly 4.5 years ago. And I acknowledge all my colleagues here that are joining me today. Thank you. So I've seen a broad spectrum of the industry. And the question is, why am I speaking here today? And I had to ask myself that question a number of times coming up to this, waiting to get to this stage where I could give my talk. Brian called me some months ago and said that he was putting together the agenda for today. And I didn't know what he wanted to talk about, but I thought he wanted me to participate in some fashion. And he said, well, we've got these panels in the morning. And in my head, I'm thinking, well, I can moderate, I can sit on a panel. And then he said, and we've got a keynote speech in the afternoon. And my heart went right into my throat. I was not looking to do a keynote speech. And then he went back to the panels. And I thought, thank God he didn't pick me to do the keynote speech. I just didn't wait long enough in the conversation. And he came back around and asked me if I would talk. And I asked him what he would want me to talk about. And he thought, well, we'd like your perspective on the industry, where you've been in the past few years, kind of the reality, and then what do you think we should be thinking about from my perspective, and to agree, a Scholastic perspective. So I'm going to talk about that today, a little bit of a post-mortem, little PTSD over the last few years for all of us, but to just go back for a second and realize what we've been through in practical terms. So not a lot of data, as you can see, not a lot of charts, some nice abstract art here. The message I'm sending is really a call to action. I think we've talked a lot this morning about metadata and the need to pass information back and forth. That's really important. I think there's a sense of urgency that to a certain extent we're missing. I think the industry underlying the 20,000 foot view is still in some sort of instability and fragile place. But to go back for a moment, I want to talk about the few decades before the last few years. And I thought about this. I was on the print side of the business for the first 25 years or so of my career. And the first image that came to mind when I thought about the first 20 years was the Rock'em Sock'em robots. Every day we were going in trying to win new work from publishers, and every day publishers were bidding against multiple printers, and it was a war of pennies, and it lasted that way for a long time. And the print industry was very hard then, and continued to be. And we went into this Rock'em Sock'em as a regular basis. But at the same time, paper was plentiful. We didn't really have trouble. We could source it. We were a big part of the industry. The supply chain worked, which we took for granted at the time. And schedules were consistent. So we had 45 days schedules from China. We had 10-day schedules from domestic printers. It worked. And then we had the relatively calm with an occasional Friday afternoon emergency that we all have lived through so many times. But it was, in a way, it was a cadence that continued and was consistent. And then we all know what happened in March 2020. So 2 weeks became 3 years. I remember Thursday, I think it was March 13th, and Merrill and I were at the halls of Scholastic, and there was this big debate about whether or not we should go home. And Dick Robinson, our CEO, was considering it. We were waiting for the email and watching the news. And finally, we just bailed. We said, we're heading home. We're heading home. We're not waiting for Dick. And so we did so, but we didn't know what we didn't know. We were completely unprepared. We woke up the next morning, like all of us here in the room, and we thought 2 weeks off, great. Let's enjoy this. And so we just thought, hey, let's get on a call and just make sure we stay connected during this time. Still thinking it was going to be two weeks, but of course it went on from 2 weeks. And what happened? So Asia started to shut down. We scrambled. We didn't have capacity here in the States, but we needed to find a room for all these books. And we started to look. The domestic printers filled up very quickly. We started looking for alternatives. I called friends, many of whom in this room, and said, who can print a 4-color book? I need capacity. Where can I get paper? These things started to become larger and larger as 2 weeks went on to 3 months, and we know what happened from there. In the long run, at Scholastic, we ended up moving over 50 million books out of Asia and other regions and found new homes, which was not an easy task. The industry is strained. A mid-size book printer can put out about 30 million books a year. Scholastic is not the biggest publisher, so we had all the other big publishers that were looking to do the same thing. And it really set the domestic market into a tailspin. On top of that, container costs went from $1,500 a container to $25,000 a container. And that was obviously eating into the work that was remaining in Asia and coming over. And then lastly, publication dates became second fiddle is the word I'm using here. They were, I guess, optional, if I can say so. It was really, when can we get the books? And everyone had to move a lot of books out because we just couldn't get that capacity. So a difficult time. We couldn't pivot, and that certainly was chaos, and we all lived through it. So where are we today? We have years of inventory, and we have full warehouses. And this is not going to be a problem that goes away anytime soon. We all got scared. We overbought. We overbought in print product, and we overbought in paper. And then the demand started a dramatic downturn in November. And in the industry, we all started looking at each other and say, how long is this going to last? And a lot of people felt that we'd get through the first quarter and things would bounce back. Warehouses are still full, and demand is not back, and books aren't moving. So we have an issue here for the next 12 to 18 months, and many of the printers in the room can attest that they need work. They didn't need work 18 months ago. They were full. They need work desperately now. And this is not going to be an issue that's going to go anytime soon. We still have global strife and uncertainty. Right now, there's a ongoing pressure. The business side, let's go back to the low cost, and the supply chain side saying we need to manage our risk. There's still regional concerns, and that is a real fight that's happening day in and day out. How do we manage our business, protect our business, but still do it at a cost that works for the company? Paper is heading towards a crisis. So I know we're keeping the tempo and the mood high this morning, and I'm an optimist at heart. I really am. My team can tell you. Paper's a problem. Going into the pandemic, paper for the book industry was about 4%. I suspect it's probably closer to 3%. And that's kind of a this for the paper companies. More paper mills are converting to corrugate, to brown paper, to diapers, higher value papers. Paper's a problem. And as an industry, that's something we can easily get our arms around. Why do we need different shades of white for a 5.5, 8.5 young adult? We don't. We can all come together and say, here's the kind of paper we want in terms of our quality, our texture, our brightness, our opacity. And we get with the mills and the merchants and we say, we want to buy this much in this paper. Keep us in that. Instead, we're fighting each other because we think the texture's a little too toothy. Let's get one that's a little more soft. I'm afraid those days are past us, and I think we have to get past them. So paper's a problem. My colleague Lisa put up a chart in one of our last meetings in one particular grade. I don't remember what it was. I blocked it out. But she said if one more of paper making machines goes offline, our demand in this grade is now far higher than the available paper. We're going to be back into a situation where we're waiting 90, 120 days for paper or longer. That's something I think BISG can easily put on the table for discussion. Digital quantities in excess of 10,000 quantity. We talked a lot about forecasting and demand this morning. And the piece that we're embracing at Scholastic, and everyone knows this, we can forecast and forecast and forecast, and it will always be wrong. We're never going to get it right. We could get lucky on some titles. We can plan a lot. We're always going to be short, or we're going to be long. We as an industry have to lean into digital, not only to ensure we have product to sell, but to manage our overprinting. We throw a lot of work away. We throw a lot of product away. And we talk about sustainability and the efforts that we're taking to improve our lot as an industry. I hazard a guess that it's hundreds of millions of dollars that we're recycling in product for safety stock, because we're afraid. We have technology that we can embrace, digital printing. We're moving up to 3,000 crossover, 4,000 crossover. Why can't we get to 5,000 and 6,000 as an industry? The majority of print quantities are at 5,000. If we can utilize digital print technology and not print 5, but maybe print 3 or 3,500, but then we have to have a very quick replenishment. So that means we have to have the metadata, we have to have the connections between the publishing community, the providers, and the technology manufacturers that are working to quickly replenish. Digital, I think we are overlooking a huge opportunity as an industry. It's only about 15% of POs today. It's been there for years. That said, the presses are bigger, the quality is better. It can solve a lot of our concerns on stockouts and overprinting. So again, I think BISG can lean into that. And then also, as we've had to redeploy our volume from Asia, and we're still very cautious about going back, we're finding new areas to produce our product. So on the map here, the two big red dots, that was kind of our legacy. We printed Asia-centric and a little bit domestically. And as you see on the blue dots here, we're emerging print in Europe, India, Mexico, domestic US, digital all over domestic US, a little bit in India, and a lot of emerging digital. The infrastructure really doesn't exist today to do this efficiently. To take one file and distribute that across that network and have it print pretty much the same and look the same. Again, it's an area that BISG can lean into. How can we help publishers and printers bridge that gap? The technology is available, the partners are here. We can do it. It's not a difficult issue. The 6 million represents the 6 million books we will print digitally at Scholastic this year. 3.5 years ago, it was 0. So we've leaned into chaos, and we've leaned into saying, what will we be able to lean on when we're in trouble, when we have stockouts, when we need to quickly replenish? And again, I think as an industry, we're missing an opportunity there. Lastly, I'll talk about global hybrid CPU. So as we're in all these areas, we're splitting up jobs, and we're taking a low-cost CPU, and we're combining that with a mid-range cost in domestic and maybe a little higher cost in digital. In some cases, digital is the lowest cost. And we're blending all that together, and we're giving back that to the publisher for their P&L, and at the same time mitigating the risk and reacting quickly with digital. We now have a metric within Scholastic. How many of our vendors, as a percent, do we have a primary offset and a primary digital? What percentage of our vendors do we have that as identified, so we can pivot quickly? And all that means is that we've got the color management managed, we've got the file process flows managed, and we can pivot and be nimble. We talked about capacity and demand. As an industry, this is a cyclical issue that we live through year in, year out. We continue to do that today. As I mentioned, printers right now are hungry for work. Publishers don't have it. we've got to come together. I think the first conference I attended after pandemic, Brian was there. And the first conversation we had was forecasting and demand, capacity and demand. How can we overlay these things as an industry and use the valleys? Because right now we've got all this capacity that's sitting out there that's idle for 6 months out of the year. Why can't we as an organization, as an industry, talk about those valleys and how we can better utilize that capacity that's sitting and is empty? And I think often what's overlooked here are the authors, the small houses. They don't get to have some of these conversations. I think that's a place we can elevate that conversation. When there are valleys, can we bring in some houses that maybe not have the opportunity to be in those conversations and create demand capacity for that author in that small house, and we can utilize some of that open press time. Capacity and demand, I think BISG has to lean into and bring partners together to solve that. Material standards, as I mentioned, from a paper standpoint, BISG can be a leader there. Sustainability, how do we waste less product? How do we become more efficient? And we have to also coordinate as publishers and printers what we're working on. I spoke to a handful of printers preparing for this talk, and they don't know what we're working on from a sustainability perspective. We're talking about perhaps taking some embellishments off our covers that might not be very sustainable. Well, printers are investing in technology and machines to put embellishments on our covers. We need to have a little more coordination as an industry around our investments and our intention. I had the pleasure of having dinner with Andy Merson a few days ago. For those of you who don't know, Andy is the owner of Command Web Companies. And Andy's been in this industry for, I'm going to hazard a guess, six decades. And I probably spoke to a dozen of my colleagues in the print and the publishing industry, but it took Andy at the end of our conversation to say, and Andy's got a gruff voice, he said, what's AI gonna do to all this? And I hadn't given that any consideration. But what I did remember is that for a period of my career, I worked for Lightning Source. And when Lightning Source first started to create product, they had a policy, Ingram, that they would always have product in stock. So they would buy 2 copies, regardless. If somebody sent a book in, they'd buy 2 copies. And there were some really smart people that just started auto-generating tens of thousands of versions of product, and they made a lot of money. And that went on for some time until Ingram realized what to do, and they figured it out. Something will happen with AI. I went into chat, is it GBT or CBT? I don't even remember anymore. It's that new. And I just typed in, write me an updated version of Moby Dick. And within 12 seconds, I had a full synopsis. I had 8 chapters, and it was telling me what I should do. And then I said, write me a summary paragraph for the first chapter. And in 5 seconds, I got that summary paragraph. And then I said, give me the character description of that first character in that first chapter. So I'm not endorsing that, but it will happen. And I think that's an opportunity for the printers to lean into it. Not so sure about the publishers. Again, I'm not endorsing it. It's a technology that will develop, and as an industry, it'll affect us. So who's responsible? And I say that intentionally. Where's Brian? Who's responsible? Who is accountable for making us more efficient? BMI, I think, has a hand in this, the Book Manufacturing Institute. Brian, I think, has done an excellent job of reaching out to the Book Manufacturing Institute, Matt Baer. They've done some conferences together. We have to do better. When I first got my job at Scholastic, I called Matt at BMI and I said, I want to be a member. And he talked to their board and he said, no, can't do it, you're a publisher. Exact opposite of what we have to be doing as an industry now, more than ever. And I know Brian's working on that. And BISG, obviously, is the one place where all of the industry can come together, and which is what we're doing here today. And then AAP, I'm on a sustainability committee for AAP, and I think we need to get them at the table as well. And if nothing else, ensure that the conversation is happening at all levels. And I think we have to get tactical. We have to have meetings beyond just data. And I think a group that's missing from the meetings are the users, people who are using this day in, day out production. And they're not going to talk about metadata. They're going to say, this is what I need. I have a title. I need to print it in 3 different locations. How do I get that done? And then the organizations have to stand up and say, well, I can do that. I've got presses. I've got binding equipment. And then we need the technology layer in the middle saying, okay, you want that, you have that. Let's figure out how we put these 2 things together. But we have to have the users at the table. And I think as an industry, we've lost that. There was a big effort 10, 15 years ago to have production meetings and talk about production issues. And that's by and large gone from the industry. We don't talk about that stuff anymore. Yet we're at a point in time in which that's the opportunity. All these technologies and capabilities are available to us, yet we're really not talking about it at a practical level. Some of the things I've talked about today. So in closing, I think we need to embrace chaos. We need to accept the fact that our industry is still in a very fragile state. And I think one significant change, global issue, print bankruptcy, paper mill closure, and we're going to be back into a situation where it's very, very tenable. So the work we were doing this morning about figuring out how to connect and collaborate is not a nice to have. I think it's a must have as an industry. We have to get better. And I thank BISG for doing that. And in closing, the last slide, and this is my cheap request. Scholastic has a sister organization, if you will, nonprofit, Scholastic Arts and Writing Awards. And we're having our gala on June 8th. This is, from my perspective, one of the most moving events for the publishing industry that has nothing to do about publishing. We host this in honor of young high school artists, writers, poets, photographers, all across the nation. We come together in Carnegie Hall, and there's a beautiful ceremony, and the kids get to come up on stage and read their poetry and show their art. And afterwards, there's a lovely dinner gala at, where is it at this year? It's at the Carnegie Hall, and then, yeah, on the rooftop. No, this year it's at the Follies, Ziegfeld Follies. We moved the location. But for those who are interested, it's a very moving night, and it's a night where you can meet a lot of people in the industry and not talk about the industry, which sometimes we need to do and probably should do more of. So if you're interested, certainly you can talk to me or artandwriting.org, and it'll tell you all you would need to know. With that, thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.